Major reasons why we thank God, and today I will touch two of them. Number one, the first reason we thank God is because of who He is. If you know who God is, it will occasion worship, it will occasion gratitude, it will occasion thanksgiving. The second reason we thank God is because of what He does. If you know and acknowledge what God does, you will have no choice but to thank Him. In fact, you can't outdo God. Because before you acknowledge and realize to thank Him, He would have done much more. In fact, you can only thank Him for the ones you are aware of. And there are many God is doing that you are not aware of. The Bible said He saves you from the arrows that fly by day and the destructions that waste in noonday, and then the pestilence that destroys at night. So there are attacks that God is shielding you from even while you are sleeping. There are many things God is doing for you that you will get to discover in heaven. So you can only thank Him for the one you know. And the ones you don't know is much more than the one you are aware of. So the second reason we thank God is because of what He does. The third reason we thank God is because of what He enables us to do for Him and for others. Because if it were not for God, there is so much we cannot do. Man in himself is a being of evil because he is fallen and corrupt. The reason we can do good and do good for God and others is because it is Him that worketh in us, both to will and to do of His good pleasure. So when you do good, don't go thinking you are one special being who is different from others. It's because God helped you. So the reason we thank God is because of what He enables us to do. And then the fourth reason we thank God is because of what we see Him do in the lives of others. When you look around you and you find the favor of God in the lives of people, if your heart is pure, you will thank God. But unfortunately, there are many who become jealous when God does good for others. That's an evil heart. When you find God prospering people, it's an occasion to thank Him. Tonight, I just want to share with us, basically on the first two aspects, who God is and what God does. Who is God? This is the foundation of theology. It's the study of God. It's inexhaustible for two reasons. Number one, even the one that can be cognitively articulated will take aeons to exhaust. And then there's so much of God that we cannot articulate cognitively because it's an attempt to study an infinite being with a finite mind. So, to a very large extent, the Bible said His ways are past finding out. But you see, if we worship God correctly, there is a measure of Him we have to know. Jesus was speaking to the Samaritan woman and said, you worship what you know not. He said, but we worship who we know. So there is a measure of the knowledge of God we must apprehend if our worship must be accurate. Exodus 3 verse 14. That is one of the scriptures that give us a very holistic definition of the concept of God. God answering Moses when he wanted to explain himself to Moses, and he said, I am that I am. He said, say unto them, I am have sent you. This definition of God captures God in a context, and that context is a self-existent and eternal one. So he's called the eternal self-existent one. That definition affects two major components that only God can sustain. Eternal in the sense that He's the only one who did not begin and is the only one who has no end. So even beginning is a reference in God. That's why you read your book, your Bible, Genesis chapter 1 verse 1. It said, in the beginning, God said. That means God pre-exists the beginning. So He is eternal in nature. Beginning began in Him. And then He's self-existent. What that means is that every other being's existence is dependent on God. God is the only one whose existence does not depend on any other. It means that without you, there will be God. Without the earth, there will be God. Without the universe, there will be God. But without God, there will be nothing. So God is the eternal self-existent one. The one who was, who is, and who is to come. The one without a beginning and without an end. And the one whose existence warrants the existence of every other person. This is who the Bible presents God to be. So when you worship God, you are not doing him a favor. You are actually validating your existence. Because without him, you are not. That's why the 24 elders were worshiping him and they said, all things were created for thy pleasure. So a man who has intelligence enough to worship and be grateful to God understands that his existence is dependent upon God. God is also the omni one, the omni. Because, it's difficult. One of the greatest challenge of theologians is to explain God to a world that is dark, a world that is blinded. And many theologians have done a great work from the foundation of time. That's why Christianity has subsisted. There are two reasons why we have Christianity: the move of power and the intellectual debate that validates God. Because as man evolves in knowledge, he departs from God. That's why theologians, they may not be captains of revival, but their existence cannot be denied. Because there are certain generations where there was no revivalist and there was no move of God. But they etched the essence of God in books, scholastic books, that the world cannot deny. They argue from all kinds of available evidences, including history. So that if you refuse God, it's not because there is no sufficient evidence, it's because you chose not to. And there are 4 dimensions of omnis that defines God. There is omnipotence, there is omniscient, and there's omnipresent, and there's omnibenevolent. The emergence of Jesus and the finished works of Christ is what necessitated the omnibenevolent. Because it's the one that is all kind, all faithful, all loving, and all generous. Only God can love unconditionally and be faithful even to the unfaithful. It is in that context that is called the omnibenevolent. John 3:16, for God so loved the world. What is the world? The world is darkness. The world is evil. The world is wickedness. But he said, God loved the world, the people of the world. It's not talking about the spirit of the age. It's talking about the dark, evil men in the world. As evil and rebellious as they are, he said God still loved them. And he didn't just love them theoretically. He said that he gave his only begotten son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. That's only benevolence of God. Paul said, while we were yet sinners, qualified for destruction. Romans 5 verse 8, he said Christ died for us. So God didn't love us because we became reasonable. God didn't love us because we apologized. God didn't love us because we repented. God loved us in our rebellion. And he gave his best while we were yet rebelling, hoping that we'll become reasonable to turn to him. And in case we don't turn to him, he still doesn't consider it a wasted venture. The omnipotence of God indicates that God is all powerful. And it is by his power that all things are sustained. That means you won't go to your house and find it there because of gravity. The reason you will meet your house there is because he sustains all things by his power. That means you won't go out now and meet your car just because you parked it well. The reason you will meet your car there is because he sustains this realm by the word of his power. The reason you will wake up tomorrow is not because you exercise today. You can die in the gym. The reason you wake up tomorrow is because he sustains all things by his power. The power of God, regardless of the evil on earth, is what keeps the earth. Otherwise, the earth would have crashed. We have put too much evil on this planet for this planet to continue existing. The reason this planet still subsists is because there is an invincible power sustaining it. It's called the omnipotence of God. I give you a few scriptures to buttress this. Matthew 19 verse 26. Jesus looked at them and said, with man, it's impossible. He said, but with God, all things, not some, are possible. Then God is also omniscient. That means he knows all things at all times. He has perfect and infinite knowledge of all things. He knows about everything, everywhere, at all times and in all times. Now, at all times is different from in all times. At all times means every time that has existed. In all times means every time that has not just existed, but that will exist. What does that mean? Right now, God is already in tomorrow. And right now, God is still in yesterday. If God lives yesterday, yesterday will crumble. And if yesterday crumble, the chronicle of time will fail. Earth will crumble. If God is not in tomorrow already, the algorithm of the universe will fail. The earth will collapse. It's like a chain. You are the one who has yesterday, today, and tomorrow. If God does not dwell in eternal now, everything will collapse. You know, when you have the chain of your machine, when the chain is turning, at some point, the chain will be making contact with the engine. But you see, if the chains that are not making contact with the engine are removed, the whole machine will fail. So it's not just the now that matters. The yesterday still matters and the tomorrow still matters. So God knows all things at all times and in all times in order for the earth to remain. Some of you reduce thanking God to, I bought a car, I got married. Those things are good, but those are byproducts. These are the real reasons why we thank God. Because the reason the earth even remains for you to marry is because God is. If God isn't, that day you married, if it's deleted from creation, there will be no marriage. So before you thank God for marriage, before you thank God for car, thank God for the one that keeps all things in place. In him we live and move and have our being. That means everything in existence at all times exists because God is present. If God is not present, existence cannot be. Existence is existence because God is present. So whether you call it progress or failure, the reason you even had a context to give definition to what you are doing in the first place is because he's present. If his presence is withdrawn, there will be no activity you call failure or progress. Many people cannot justify why they should serve God, especially when situations don't seem to be working. And in the Western world today, these are some of the major debates. Why do you think I should worship God? Why do you think I should believe that God exists in the first place? And the world is becoming a village, a global village. Those days, if you are in Africa, you think you are far away. Now, all of us are interfacing on the same platform every day. And people are seeing things that they cannot rationalize. Outside of him is nothing. Without him is nothing. All things are because he is God. And because everything derived their meaning from God, we have no choice but to praise, to worship, and to thank him. And if you know this, even the value of your life will begin to increase. Because if you know God knows all things, then you will never be stranded in your life anymore. Your relationship with God now will have bearing. If there's anything that you don't understand, you now have the one to consult. The reason you find many Christians confused is because they are not aware consciously that God has answers to everything. So they are running to people, running to institutions to answer the questions of their lives. It has not dawned on them by experience that the God they say they worship knows all things, and he has answers to the unanswerable questions of their lives. The reason you find many people think they are hiding and committing sin is because it has not come to their consciousness that God is present everywhere. So they think because the light is off, God is not seeing. He sees beyond the darkness. We are not conscious that God is present even in our thoughts. That's why we think we can do certain things outside of God. And then we are not conscious that God is all powerful. That's why we suffer anxiety. Any little thing, a Christian is thrown off balance. He's already dying, he's already afraid. Are you aware that even this creation, he is the force behind it? And if he's the force behind it, your crisis within creation cannot be too big for him to handle. And so our lack of understanding of who God is the fundamental problem that we have. Do you know that He's all benevolent? And because He's all benevolent, He is not just one powerful being in the cloud. He has a personal relationship with you. Because it's not enough to know that He's omnipotent. It's not enough to know that He's omniscient. It's not enough to know that He's omnipresent. He can be omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent, but He's in heaven and has no business with you. But if you know that He's omnibenevolent and He has demonstrated it by dying for you, there is nothing on earth that can make you be afraid, because you know, if God be for us, who can be against us? If the Lord is on our side, what is that controversy that can destroy us? But see, many Christians don't know who God is. This is the reason for their crisis. We are not doing what we are doing just because we want to be religious. No, there's an understanding we have. That understanding is what gives us victory all the time. And then on the strength of that victory, we come to give thanks. So we give thanks not just because of the victory, but because of who we've discovered God to be. I know God is all powerful. I know God is ever present. I know God is all knowing. And I know God is benevolently disposed towards me as a person, not as a pastor, not as a church member, not in the crowd, as a person. If I'm alone in the wilderness, I can be bold to call upon Him as if an army is calling Him. I can be bold to call upon Him as if a church is calling Him. I can be bold to call upon Him as if a whole generation is calling Him. Because the same thing He will do for 1,000, He will do for one.